All right, sweet. So thanks so much once again for doing this with me. Would you like to share some information about your background first?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Cam. I'm the founder of Linen. We went through Y Combinator in 2020, and we actually started out with a different open source project. But the product we're working on now is called Linen. It's a open source Slack alternative that's designed to be Google searchable. So we want to bring in a lot of the benefits of a form as well as a IRC. IRC is not very great for asynchronous. It's not great for knowledge retention. So we want to combine that with some of our abilities.
That's awesome. And what do you think is the biggest reason that organizations choose to use Linen today?
Yeah, so we originally I started out just syncing Slack conversations to a website, but I realized there's a lot of limitations with the UI and the user experience, and we wanted to take advantage of that. So like I said, the Google searchability and discoverability, we generate a lot of organic SEO content. We can host it under your domain, so everything is custom and branded. We're also working on custom single sign-on. So let's say you're a company and you want to sign in with your own authentication. Instead of using a Google or Linens, we provide that for you. And we also give you a lot of abilities to like manage threads. So you can move threads by dragging and dropping them between channels. We can merge threads between them. We have a lot of things around customer support, especially when these communities begin to grow like larger. So that's most of the reason they would use it, mainly because we focus in on the community use case, and Slack and Discord is designed for chat and not directly for community.
Absolutely, that makes sense. And that explains why the community is growing very fast. You have Kotlin and Cypress using Linen already and hundreds of thousands of people participating. So that
Yeah,
makes
yeah,
sense.
yeah.
Could you
There's
go ahead?
Yeah, there's quite a bit of content that gets generated that is essentially hidden. Essentially, we have over like 10 million threads and messages that are being synced and like engaged on. So the platform is still in the early stage right now. We still have
First
a lot
year,
to
right?
go.
Yeah.
Yeah, first year. So there's still a lot of things to do and to grow. But yeah, for sure.
Let's go. That's awesome. And so, how did you originally decide to open source Linen? And what lessons you
So
brought from paper cups, your first project?
yeah. So context, I started Paper Cups in 2020, and we were open source intercom, and that had a lot of interesting learning. So Linden started out as a closed source project, mainly to sync the conversations, but um, we we felt that it was in the spirit of open source because a lot of our tools and users were open source.
Yes.
But I felt like Slack and Discord was not. It's proprietary, it's closed source, and I feel like if you're using open source tool, and you should use something for the job. So that was one reason to open source. The more practical aspect from a business standpoint, open source allows you to give a lot of trust in the community. I think being able to see that, let's say in the worst case scenario, company goes out of business, something happens, the code base is still there. You still have access to it. You don't have that worry. Second, we are much more transparent. We don't sell your users' data. You can see how we handle
Very
our
important.
data policy. Like our business model is around charging companies to for hosting under their domain. So um, you can see if we're doing anything sketchy in terms of privacy or data orientation. And then finally, I think eventually we want to use our own tool to build a community out of it. So if we're selling to open source companies or companies with communities, we should probably have one.
That makes total sense. And so, in the beginning, how did you go about deciding on the license as well as attracting the first contributors?
Linden was still mainly worked on the core team. We haven't focused too much on external contributors, mainly because there's still a lot of core things that we want to improve on, especially around like notifications, authentication, and those things. It's tough to get contributors because we have all the context and we need to get the time commitment for essentially somebody full time. For Paper Cups, however, we attracted our first contributed because we were using Elixir. At the time, Elixir was very hot and people wanted to learn it. So people used our tool almost as an example for like a standard what you would use a CRUD app for. So we haven't focused too much on contributions right now, mainly because contributors do take a lot of time. I think it does take time for them to ramp up, and it varies how much resources you want to allocate. We during Papercup's time, we went out of our way to make sure tickets were easy to consume and do all of that, but it did take a lot of effort. Right now, we're kind of in a shipping execution mode, which is why we haven't focused too much on the contribution side.
Got it. And it sounds like that a bottleneck in the process can be reviewers' time, the maintainers' time, and not the contributors' time.
Exactly. Well, like ideally, you have a maintainer who's really familiar with your code base, really familiar with what you're working on, have architecture knowledge, has like customer context or like users of it, but that's really hard to find. And like one full-time engineer working on it is better than probably like 10 or like 100 part-time contributors, because they have the knowledge, they have the content, and part-time can vary, mean like one ticket a month, right? One ticket a week. It really varies. So that's why we haven't focused on it. I know you're working on something in that space, but yeah, that's why we haven't pursued it. I think context is
there's
hard.
Opportunity for improvement in these workflows.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and
I
I
probably
think
look for some examples if you have some that you're following or taking advice from.
Yeah, I would say if someone were to solve something in this space, I would like there's areas around like moving communities engagement beyond like different levels. So there's obviously different levels of engagements with the product, right? You have initial like, oh, make a pull request on a README, or like fix a comment, these kind of things that gradually move them to be more engaged with the product. I think that workflow isn't very well defined yet. That maybe there's something there. If you're looking to start a product in it.
And accordingly, gamifying it, maybe that advanced.
Yeah, I think that gamifying and advancing, it still takes a lot of time and like resource investment. Like open source isn't like free, right? Like in terms of like time commitment, you probably would spend less time on some things and more time on other things. So the reason you open source isn't for a product tend not to be contributors, or you could. There are very specific companies that are designed for like contributor attribution. So like Airbyte, for example, where you want people to integrate with your company and build out the network effect that way. Whereas for open source projects, some open source project, you need a lot more context, and getting those types of contributions is a little bit tougher.
And so yeah, it can get tricky, and having a solution that applies to everyone is challenging here.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, and this is like the third time. Like my first job was working on a tool called Bosch, and it was mostly core maintainer team that worked on it. And I think that's actually the case for most code bases. Maybe that'd be a good research article for you, where you look into like the frequency of contributions based on like outside of it. And my understanding is still it's like 95% core contributors and like 5% like external people. And people can move into the core contributor path, but most of the time it's still the core team that's doing it. And if you're looking to go open source because you want to get contribution, you have to either architect your product or your company around it. Otherwise, the amount of time and resources spent is probably quicker if you just had a core team. Obviously, if you don't have the resources or money, that's a different story. Yeah.
I understand, and that's a very interesting perspective here. And I understand the motivations you also mentioned in the beginning, why to choose to do it despite all the challenges. And certainly the finding new contributors and the reviewer time and overhead is right at the center of it. In terms of supporting the project, as well as monetizing it. How did you approach these things?
Yeah, so Linen was a product first before it was a open source project. So our business model is always to charge like companies because they have the money and the resources. The goal isn't to charge like free developers. I actually think that's a bad idea anyways. I think most open source projects you need to figure out how you need to monetize. I think for a lot of like enterprise dev tools, especially, you sell to enterprises. Our thing is we believe that most companies will have a community or a community space, especially like developer communities. And we want to bring the best of both worlds of, of a chat as well as like a more web-based form type of thing.
Absolutely. Any surprises as a founder in open source?
Well, this is the second time doing it, and so it's a little bit less. I think what is interesting is a lot of people are a lot more willing to engage with open source content wise. They tend to like more more willing to you have a different avenue of distribution than the traditional content strategy. So that could be interesting, and also GitHub also has a trending feature which helps like discovery. It's not as big of a player, but there are stuff that do help projects get discovered. I think it still comes down to you need to make a good product. Like if it's not good, nobody's going to use it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And why do you think people choose to contribute to projects, whether they're commercial or not, whether they're small or big?
Yeah, there's a few reasons. One is if you're a user of the product and you find some issue with it. I made my first pull request with like PyTorch because I found a bug in their code and like the comment was off. So I made that, and I felt like I want to do it. Second, obviously, is they want to learn the language. Some people want to like, oh, I want to learn Rust or Elixir. So that was a big reason people contributed to Paper Cups. And then third is like, you just work at a company, right? Like that's the reason. And I think that it's either comes down to like you're the user of the product or you want to learn and build your portfolio.
And to follow up on that in terms of building a portfolio or a reputation, something that can potentially be translated to a new job later on or other opportunities for advancement. And is that something you've seen in the past or something that I've heard of?
Yeah, we have.
Tell me.
Yeah, we've had some contributors who wanted to get into Elixir development back when we were working on Paper Cups, and they contributed to Paper Cups. Eventually, they found an Elixir job, which was great. Yeah.
Was it the case that you helped them with that, or you had certain companies or organizations approach you and say, "Hey, we're looking for Elixir developers"?
No, I think it helped that they had a real world application that that helped. It was all themselves, right? We didn't do anything besides making our stuff public and try to have some tickets. It's it's their work. So yeah.
Is there another project today, outside of Linen that you're impressed by or that you really love in open source?
Yeah, you guys should check out Super Tokens. They're doing open source like Auth0. I think they've been making a lot of good progress, especially compared to the other teams who have like huge banks, and the amount of progress they've made for how much resource they have is like pretty great. Yeah.
That's good to hear. Sounds like they make your life easier as a builder.
Yeah, I think I like those type of product, and also they're competing against like Auth0 and these legacy players. But yeah.
Are there people that you follow or would recommend people check out in terms of learning about open source or about building a company?
I think open source, if you want to learn to build an open source company, I think you kind of have to figure out the business model. You have to figure out who you will eventually sell to. I mean, you can always open source for fun and for free, but if you're looking for some sort of product, there's kind of like a few models. One is if you're on premise, the classic one is you go on premise, you sell an enterprise version of it, and then the other one is it's like a SaaS product. So you have Sentry. It's kind of how Linen is operating. These other tools that are open source, like Plausible, things like that are a SaaS product essentially that's happens to be open source.
And do you think that represents a new sort of like a new type of open source project, something that is, you know, more recent? How would you describe it?
Yeah, I do think it, when we were first starting Paper Cups, I think it was becoming more of a trend. Then I think we were one of the there were companies before, but you see like emergence of that business model, that open core business model. I think like with the success of like GitLab and Mattermost, those kind of type of company, they kind of pioneered this like open core business model. The SaaS one is still a little bit different. I think like companies like Cal.com, they have more of a SaaS like business model. I could be wrong. So, but that's kind of the trend. Is that there's a few reasons you want to do it, right? Like you have trust in the code base, in people like seeing the project. You have trust in terms of privacy and security, and then trust in that like the code will still be here even if the company is gone.
That all sounds like an unfair advantage, almost like an edge. And so, what do you think is the other side of it in terms of the biggest challenge or the biggest pitfall?
Yeah, it's not zero sum. It's not free. It's not completely free. How we operate, we had to clean up the code base because there were some more private stuff that we didn't want to open source. That it's not non-zero time. So if you want to go from like closed source to open source, like people as a startup, you do like your stuff isn't perfect, so sometimes you rely on security through obscurity. So there's stuff that you need to do. You like managing a community still takes time. It still takes resources. It's not like completely free. Competitive. From a competitive landscape, like you may need to make sure your license is like properly set up. Because when we were doing Paper Cups, we had a few people straight up cloning our stuff and trying to resell it. And you know, some people might be okay with that, but it also depends on kind of your motivations of it. Yeah.
Wow. And so with all this on your plate, how do you get help today, and what are your plans to you know, on this front? Yeah.
Yeah, you know, we're trying to do another release probably end of the month or early January. We released the standalone Slack version a few months back, and there's just a lot of features we want to push out. There's a lot of things we want to differentiate on. There's a lot of polishes that we want to do. So right now it's still very early stage, and there's still a bunch of stuff that we feel like we're missing, and we're just getting a lot of the table stakes features out. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it is the first year, you know, at the end of it. And so that sounds very reasonable. And probably velocity will increase as these foundations are set in place even more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were planning on getting a desktop client, but we need to do quite a big refactor for that, mainly because the SEO aspect of it makes things a little bit trickier.
The desktop.
Yeah.
And is there a next milestone that you're hoping for Linen to accomplish?
I think the big milestone is the next like feature parity release. We're like close to it, where you feel like you're not missing out on a lot of the other features that we just haven't gotten to. So there's that. I think desktop client or mobile app will probably come probably like the second quarter of next year. So that's probably it. The team is a little small, so we need to prioritize. So baby steps.
As you have been building the team and continue to do so, would you like to share any more information about how people joined today, whether they were first contributors before they joined full time? Yeah.
Well, these were the team members were all just hires. I found through my network, or people I knew. How I have hired in the past is we typically do a contract, and then based on how that goes, we move forward with it.
Contract to hire in a way, first contribute.
Yeah, I think it's hard to like figure out how good somebody is. I think in interviews, or just people might not be good at lead code, but they might still be really good at coding. So contracting tends to work better.
I agree. Makes total sense. And I think it's becoming gradually a little more of a norm and a process companies adopt. Yep. That's great. So with all this work, to be done, and that's great. What's the best way for someone to get started today and contribute?
Yeah, I would look at, I would just start kind of looking into the code base, and I would probably try to use it and figure out there are small things that I think UX wise we can improve on, and I'm always happy to like merge and pull requests. We have a lot of like dumb little things that needs fixing, so if you use it and have some feedback and have pull requests, that'd be great.
That would be great, and I'm sure people will check it out. Well, thanks so much for sharing all this information. And I do think a lot of this will benefit people who are building in the space. And so really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome.
And today we're going for a demo of Linen. Linen is a Google searchable Slack alternative that's designed for communities. Slack and Discord is really friendly for communities, but it isn't Google searchable and can get really chaotic. Linen brings the benefits of both real-time chat as well as tools to help you manage the chaos and scale the community. First off, Linen is Google searchable. So let's start with a search term here, and you'll see that this is actually a Linen page. This is one of our customers, and it'll take you to a branded community that's under their subdomain with context about an issue this user is having. So over time, it scales because you can reduce the customer support load by having people finding and answering questions right within your community. And second, Linen is designed for a real-time chat experience. So anytime somebody is asking a question, it updates real time as if it would happen in Slack. But as you know, Slack can get chaotic, as well as you have very large number of channels and members and community messages are happening. So one thing we try to do is we let you organize your threads and messages. So let's say a user is need some help. This is a question. Here is the context. And you've seen this pretty often in Slack communities and Discord communities where they don't like using the thread functionality. So what we can actually do is we can move this thread and merge it into the same message. So now all of the context is within a single place, and then you can set a title here, help around something. You can use a more useful title, but now with the title, you can organize your conversations so that it isn't single line messages all over the place, and it is much more organized. And let's say somebody isn't asking the question in the right place. You can also drag and drop and move the thread into the correct location. So for example, I move it to feedback, and you see this question here is over here already, and you can do the same thing with testing. And now this lets you reorganize your community so that it scales, and it's a much better way of consuming the conversation rather than reading through 21 line messages. Cool. And then the second thing we support is we try to build it for community support. So most communities, as they scale, become a support tool and support channel. And one thing that's really annoying about supporting within traditional apps like Slack and Discord is you have a lot of channels, and oftentimes conversations get missed. So what you can actually do is browse all the conversation in a feed here, where you can see every single conversations within a single location. So this is a message that I created earlier about helping around something, and you can respond directly from here. This this is closed. And you can post it closed, or you click the little check mark here, and they will do the same thing, and they will close the conversation. And this is something you can use as your team grows to help manage these conversations. One of the most important thing in a support environment is having all your conversations in one location, so that you don't have to miss specific messages. And this way you'll also make your community feel more engaged, and because messages aren't being dropped and going into the abyss. Secondly, we also support the feature of filters, where you can browse purely from your conversations. And this obviously helps you manage your own conversations, as well as all the ones within your team that you need to browse. Finally, we have some very basic metrics that we're working on. We have daily active users that's in the pipeline, as well as weekly active users, as well as other metrics around like customer support and community, like average close time, average response time, and things that will measure engagement. And thank you. This is the Linen demo.